Welcome back, my friends. Today's video, we're gonna do another question and answer. Yes, I realize there's a lot of breaking news currently happening in Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow with a regular update video. But once a month, I enjoy doing something different. So on the community tab of my channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this. You can ask me any question about anything, then scroll down and give a thumbs up to the questions you want me to respond to in a video. I think any question that got over 20 thumbs up, I will be responding to in this video. So the most thumbs up question was from Tank2402. Jake, do you think that after the war, Ukraine will hunt down Russian war criminals much like Israel did after World War II? So after World War II, there was the Nuremberg trials. All of the most prominent Nazis were tried and held accountable. But the judicial process for prosecuting Nazis never ended. The State of Israel continues up until today to try and extradite and prosecute any Nazi war criminals. And this is an incredible story. The last Nazi in America, a camp guard, was deported by the US in 2019, but died in a hospital in Germany before being sent to Israel to stand trial. So the man's name was jakebroeyt, and he was 95 years old, meaning that he was a camp guard at a concentration camp in his early 20s, 75 years ago. And the State of Israel never let up, fighting a 25-year legal battle in order to have him extradited to Israel. So I definitely think Ukraine should and will have a similar process for the Russian officers most guilty of war crimes. This process could play out for 75, 80 years. Get them all, even when they're 95 years old. I think any Russian soldier or Russian officer that can be proven guilty of targeting innocent civilians, Ukraine should go after them by any means necessary until they're all held accountable. Next question. Dear Jake, I love your videos, and sometimes I feel sorry for you because you are going through a lot of hard stuff just to keep us informed. So my question is, how do you manage to keep optimistic? And please don't get me wrong, I love it, and I believe the reason why I love your channel is exactly this attitude. It's only I get so sad sometimes, and yet after a day or two, there will be another video from you. And I don't know how you do it, but most of the times it will lift my mood, so thank you so much. And I feel it too, guys. There are days when I see reports on Twitter that make me very sad or make me very angry. It's not difficult in this war to become flooded with pure emotion, pure hatred for what Russia is doing. And I'll tell you guys my trick. You need to have a guiding point. You need to have a simple message for yourself that you can remind yourself of when you're in this emotional state. And I've done this several times. I tell myself, Russia is not going to win this war. Yes, a lot of people are going to die, a lot of people are going to suffer. What is currently happening to Ukraine is outrageous and immoral and tragic. But Russia is not going to win this war. And I've been saying that since day one on my YouTube channel, which is what allows me to make these videos and continue going. And if you want a record, here's a video I posted June 16th of last year, and it's titled, "The War Map in Ukraine Does Not Matter." I made this video 11 months ago, and this was when the Russians were about to capture the cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. So if we go back in time and think about what was happening in the war 11 months ago, it was looking very dire for the Ukrainians. The Russians controlled Izium, the Russians controlled Liman, they were about to capture Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They were directly threatening the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. If you were to ask the casual war observer in June of last year, when do you think Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are going to fall to the Russians? They were predicting within 2 or 3 months. And you can go back and rewatch this video. I argued the math doesn't add up for Russia. The economy of Russia is only slightly larger than Spain, and the entire Western and NATO alliance supports Ukraine. They support them financially, they support them militarily. Yes, you can argue the support isn't as urgent or as fast as it should be, but there's no way you can stack up the math in which Russia is going to win this war. The only question is, how long will it take for Russia to lose this war and collapse? So going back to your question, when I see the videos and the pictures of the atrocities, I know that perhaps I have another 50 years of life on this planet, and Russia is not going to win this war. I get to, safe here in America, enjoy the rest of my life knowing that Ukraine is going to defeat Russia, and Russia is not going to win this war. Next question, your knowledge and confidence through this nuclear saber rattling has been very helpful. How did working in such close proximity to nuclear weapons shape your worldview? And for those who don't know, I served for 6 years in the United States Air Force as a launch officer. So this is the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile system, and I was in charge of the maintenance, security, and operations. So when I went to work, I signed for custody of between 10 and 20 nuclear weapons. They were my responsibility. And it was a very weird job, to say the least. I was stationed in North Dakota. But when I studied and I thought about nuclear weapons, I'm convinced this is what has prevented World War III from happening. If you go back in time and think about military history and wars, from the Napoleonic Wars to the 30 Years' War to World War I, World War II, it was just this consistent cycle of alliances and betrayals and dictators and royal families going to war. It's easy to send your troops to war when you're safe in your capital city, but with intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, the game changed. And thankfully, since World War II, I know this is hard to believe, but the last 70 or 80 years has been the most peaceful time on the planet in our entire history. Prior to 1945, it was just kind of continuous warfare between everyone, all the time. So nuclear weapons has guaranteed a certain level of peace and security. They've not been used in anger or hostility since the bombings in Japan. And this isn't for want of use. I'm sure the Soviets would have loved to use nuclear weapons to expand their borders and spread communism all over the planet. But the NATO alliance and the US nuclear arsenal prevented them from doing this, prevented them from expanding. And as far as my appreciation for my job and what I was doing, it wasn't a very fun job. But I knew that because I was doing it, other people didn't have to do it. So yes, we have the 3 nuclear powers, Great Britain, France, and the United States. But the United States provides nuclear protection to other countries: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and then NATO ally members. What this means is that these other countries don't have to have a nuclear program. They don't have to have missileers. That's what I did. So I took a lot of pride in the fact that doing my job as a launch officer, nobody else had to do it. There wasn't somebody in a bunker in Australia or somebody in a bunker in South Korea, because the United States was providing this nuclear umbrella, this nuclear deterrence to our allies. It's I guess this could be a video all in and of its own, but that's a brief synopsis of my thoughts on nuclear weapons. Next question. What could Putin decide to do when he doubles down in the case of a decisively successful Ukrainian counteroffensive? So it's already happening. I think the Kremlin is preparing their population for failure. If Ukraine starts pushing in the Zaporizhia region, all they have to do is get to either Melitopol, Berdyansk, or Mariupol and cut off this road. Once this road is cut off, none of the Russian forces west of it will be able to be resupplied, and they're all going to retreat to Crimea. They've already built the defensive lines in Crimea to prepare for their inevitable retreat. And it's not going to save them. If the Ukrainians can reach the coastline, the Sea of Azov, then almost all of Crimea is within HIMARS range. It'll be within GLSDB range by this summer when that weapon system is delivered. So the Russians are screwed. There's no scenario in which they're holding on to Crimea. And I think with your question, you're asking, what evil thing is Putin going to do in response? And I've made the argument that Putin is not going to use nuclear weapons. He can't. And eventually, people are going to turn on him. I don't think anyone in Putin's immediate inner circle will turn on him because they all know their fate is tied to Putin. If Putin is overthrown, they're all going to get purged. It's that one level beyond Putin's inner circle, the people who are not directly associated with Putin, but they're still contributing to his power base. Those are the people who need to wake up and just make the coup happen. Make Putin disappear somehow so they can go to the negotiating table and end this war. They're probably going to lose everything. I still argue the most likely scenario over the next 2 to 5 years is the dissolution of the Russian Federation. It's probably going to break up into 6 to 10 new states. And there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with people who speak the same language being parts of different countries. How many countries in the world speak Arabic? It's like 15. How many countries in the world speak Spanish? Another 15 or 20. How many countries in the world, their primary language is English? Another 12, 13, 14. These are the remnants of the Spanish Empire, the remnants of the British Empire, and we're going to get, in the next couple of years, the remnants of the Russian Empire. It needs to die. Next question. Do you think that Ukraine has the means to gain localized air superiority in the areas where they counterattack using their existing Soviet force of ex-Soviet aircraft during the upcoming offensive? Thank you from one Jake to another, and greetings from Ireland. So I've not really explained this in detail in a video, but I think one of the primary reasons, there's actually a lot, but one of the primary reasons that the United States doesn't want to provide F-16s to Ukraine is they're worried about fratricide. Western countries are introducing all of these different air defense systems. And if you're introducing missiles that shoot down planes, at the same time you're introducing a lot of planes, inevitably you're going to have incidents of fratricide. This happens in every military. The United States has done this to itself. Despite all of the power and sophistication of the United States military, we have accidentally shot down and killed our own pilots, our own planes. Even the best people are capable of operator error or glitches in the system, a problem with the software and the algorithm, whatever. So I think the concern with providing planes is we're giving them all of these anti-aircraft systems. It's better to just close the skies. So is Ukraine going to continue conducting missions with their existing Soviet MiGs, flying at low altitudes, conducting... Yes, I think they're going to try, but it's incredibly risky, incredibly dangerous, not very reliable, and I think people at the Pentagon have just made the arguments, just close the skies. If something is flying at all, shoot it down, probably a Russian. Don't risk your own pilots at this point in the war. I do think eventually this will change. I think it's inevitable that Ukraine will receive F-16s, but it's not going to happen in time for a spring counteroffensive. Next question is from Jack. No questions for you, Jake. Just a deep appreciation for what you do, what you saw needed doing, and how you unhesitatingly turned your channel into that. Glory to you, glory to the heroes, glory to Ukraine. So yeah, if we go back in time 15 months, my YouTube channel was about 80,000 subscribers, and I was a finance nerd talking about trading options and credit cards and the stock market, and I was having fun. It was, well, I got out of the Air Force to do it full time, so it was my job, but as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, I kind of made this one-off video, just giving my perspective as a veteran, and it did really well. There was a transition period where I was trying to do both, talking about the stock market and talking about the war, but eventually my channel doubled in size, and there were more people that knew me because of my videos about Ukraine than my stock market and investing videos. So at that point, I wasn't a finance YouTuber. I was a war commentator. Next question. Hey, Jake, what is left? How much more combat capability does Russia reasonably have left in the field? Even at 2/3 Ukrainian estimates, we're looking at 15,000 pieces of equipment lost. At what point does it become a grave national security risk to the point that they have to stop the war? I think we're already there. I think Russia is lying to itself. So here's Ukraine's estimates. 3,700 tanks destroyed, 7,200 armored vehicles, almost 3,000 artillery pieces. If you want to go with Oryx, Oryx only counts visually confirmed. It has to be a unique picture or video in order to count. And by their estimates, 2,000 tanks. That's an insane number of tanks. So Oryx is the low number because not all things that are destroyed have visual evidence. And Ukraine's probably the high estimate. Definitely there's probably some units reporting the same destruction twice. They think they're the only ones who saw it. I don't think it's them being dishonest or disingenuous. I just think in the fog of war, you might count some destroyed units more than once. And when you go off what's on paper, Russia prior to this war claimed they had 12,000 tanks. But what is the readiness state of these tanks? They have, boneyards with thousands of old Soviet tanks that are never going to be repaired. They can't repair them. Nobody knows. That's the answer to your question. Nobody knows what Russia still has left in the barrel. But the fact that they're dragging out antique T-54s and sending it to their soldiers on the front lines, this doesn't look good for them. The fact that they've run out of anything more modern than stuff built 70 years ago. I think, once again, we're already at the breaking points where Russia's run out of serviceable and decent equipment to give to their new soldiers. One of the arguments why Russia hasn't mobilized an additional 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 men, is what are you going to give them? They don't have any more vehicles or tanks. Their production capability cannot compete with the Western alliance. This is a good question from Sherry. There have been a ton of YouTube short videos posted by soldiers. They depict all sorts of things. What their bunkers are like, the Wednesday dance from the Addams family, evacs bringing home bouquets of roses to their family. Do you think this is a level of personalized social media playing a unique role in this invasion? Admittedly, I'm addicted to viewing and replying to these war shorts. I feel like I'm sending postcards to the front line. Sherry, you are 100% sending postcards to the front lines. I know that for Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines who can get battery life for their phones and internet access, being able to see these pictures, these videos, these stories, these comments means everything to them, that they feel supported. Just like soldiers in the trenches of World War I getting letters from their family and friends. And this is something new. This is something different. This wasn't happening 20 years ago when the United States invaded Iraq. The internet and smartphone technology just wasn't there. Ukrainian soldier does Pikachu dance while gunfire rings out. I don't see this ever stopping. I think for all future wars, people are going to have smartphones with 4K cameras and the internet. And this is, in a way, asymmetrical warfare that benefits Ukraine. Russia has taken the position to ban all internet, smartphones, tablets, whatever, because they don't want information about how poorly their forces are doing getting in or out. So while the Ukrainians have access to their phones and the internet and they can communicate freely, the Russians can't. And I argue this is a force multiplier that benefits Ukraine, being able to send messages and use their smartphones with drones, etc. Russia doesn't allow it. Next question. Jake, I'd really love to hear your view on the looming debt ceiling crisis in the United States. If the U.S. defaults on its debt, could this affect our standing geopolitically? Could this have an impact on the war in Ukraine? So my personal opinion is that yes, the United States is going to default on its debt for like a week, and then the Republicans in Congress will raise the debt ceiling. If I was President Biden, I would tell the Republicans in Congress to go screw themselves, because this isn't what you do. This isn't the legislative process. If people are confused, what is the debt ceiling? Congress passes a budget. Congress is the one who makes laws. A budget was passed, a law is in place, mandating that the Treasury spend this money. So here is what the United States spends their money on. This is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Defense and Homeland Security, the VA. And what the United States does when they don't bring in enough tax revenue is they borrow money, they issue Treasury debt to pay their bills. So Congress can't have it both ways. Congress can't say, hey, U.S. Treasury, you must spend this money. This is legally mandated. But you can't borrow money from the Treasury to do it. Well, how the heck am I supposed to pay my bills? And if I was President Biden, what I would do is say, okay, nobody in the military gets paid until the Republicans raise the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling shouldn't begin with. If congressional Republicans are unhappy with the budget and they want the budget to change, they should pass a law to change the budget. Messing around with the debt ceiling is just a gimmick. It's just a nonsense tool to put pressure on the White House without having the votes to actually change the laws. Get the votes, make the argument, present a budget if you want to change the budget. So yes, I think the United States is going to default for a week. People in the military get paid on the 1st and 15th of the month. What they're going to do is, they've done this game before when I was in the military. They're going to tell everyone, oh, you're not going to get paid because Congress won't pass a budget, Congress won't raise the debt ceiling, and then the Republicans in Congress will fold, either by the end of the month or the 14th to make sure that everybody in the military gets paid. It's so stupid. This happens every couple years. But no, it's not going to financially affect anyone. It's all nonsense. Next question. Hi, Jake. Both China and Armenia just voted in the UN to label the Russians as the aggressor in this war and in their war against Georgia. What do you think will result from this? What does it mean? Well, it means that the Collective Security Treaty Organization is a joke. The CSTO is Russia's response to NATO. So NATO did not dissolve when the Soviet Union collapsed. So Russia wanted to look tough, and they pressured a bunch of ex-Soviet states to join this Collective Security Treaty Organization. And I mean, at this point, this is just an embarrassment for Russia, because none of these countries, aside from Belarus, are actually helping Russia or want to be Russia's ally. Russia is continuously threatening Kazakhstan on state TV, and Kazakhstan is doing everything it can to distance itself from Russia. So more and more, as this war drags on, the Russians look weak, the Russians look pathetic, and nobody likes Russia. Maybe Belarus, but nobody else likes Russia, and everyone is seizing the opportunity to distance themselves. And I think they all know what's coming. I think they all know that more than likely the Russian Federation is going to dissolve and break up. So they're all jostling to insulate themselves and protect themselves from what's coming. Next question. Hi, Jake. First of all, thanks for your passionate reporting about Ukraine's struggle for freedom. My question, the first tanks and tracked fighting vehicles were specifically invented to overcome trench warfare during World War I. And despite huge teething problems, they were eventually successful. Obviously, contemporary tanks are way more developed and sophisticated than their World War I ancestors. How is it possible that the current trenches on the Ukraine front line pose so many problems for modern tanks? Well, the problem for Russian modern tanks are Javelin missiles, NLAWs. Russia, 6 or 7 months ago, stopped using tanks immediately on the front lines because if they got within 2 or 3 kilometers of a Ukrainian position, they got javelined, they got NLAWed. There's also the risk of anti-tank mines being buried underground, but yeah, mostly it's these things. If Russia claims to have 10,000 tanks, NATO said we will deliver 20,000 NLAWs and javelins to Ukraine to fight them. So the tank still has a purpose, it still has a part to play in warfare. It's just not as dominant as it was 50 years ago, in the 1960s and 70s. The Soviet Union built all of these tanks expecting to conquer Europe. The goal was to keep going west until they hit Portugal, to spread communism over the entire European continent. Workers of the world unites, kill all the capitalists. And yeah, I think warfare going forward is going to have a lot more drones, a lot more, unmanned systems, and hopefully, once again, these kinds of weapon systems serve as a deterrent. We don't want to go to war. Nobody should want the kind of war that Russia is waging. So weapons like the Javelin and the NLAW, these are, peace guarantors. They prevent dictators from thinking they can use tanks to invade their neighbor. Next question. What are your thoughts on China overtaking America in the future to become the world's biggest superpower? Are you convinced that it's going to happen? And if so, what will the consequences be? So militarily, I don't see China overtaking the United States in my lifetime. Economically, sure, that makes sense if China had a bigger economy than the United States when their population is 3 to 4 times larger than the US. So it is possible that China's economy will become larger than America's. But as far as what the future of China looks like, I've been watching a lot of Peter Zion on geopolitics. He puts out a video every day. He's written 4 books. I've read all 4 books. I don't have to agree with everything he says to appreciate his unique perspective. This guy is not afraid to give his opinion and sound absolutely confident about it. But he has convinced me that China demographically is screwed. In order to continuously have a growing economy, generally you need a growing population. But in 1973, China instituted the one-child policy, and their population pyramid is a consequence of this. Urbanization is a consequence when women choose to have less children. If women can become educated and join the workforce, they generally have fewer kids. So China's most populous age demographic is 50 to 59. And these people are all looking to retire and they're not going to be working anymore. And their population is shrinking as you go younger and younger. The miracle that was China the last 40 years was mostly them stealing hundreds of millions of rural people living without modern, electricity and plumbing, bringing them into the cities for cheap labor, and then growing their economy that way. They can't do that anymore. To China's benefits, the middle class is exploded, and rural poverty has decreased to single-digit percentages. So China can't do this anymore. They can't just rob people from the countryside and bring them to the cities for cheap labor. They have a lot of Chinese people that expect a middle-class lifestyle, and they just can't sustain this. So China's got a problem. They're no longer the cheap labor pool that they were in the 80s, 90s, and O's. Lots of American companies have moved on to Myanmar and Vietnam for cheaper labor. So I think China is going to have to manage their aging population comparable to some European countries, but I agree with Peter Zion. I don't think they're a long-term threat past this decade. Next and final question, I think. Could the letters V, O, and Z on Russian military vehicles originally have been a reference to the initials of President Vladimir Oleksandrovich Zelensky in order to somehow point out that he was the Russians' prime target in the beginning of the war? I think you know the answer to this. It's not true. But for those who don't know, the letter Z doesn't exist in the Cyrillic alphabet. So it's convenient for them to put it on a vehicle because it's kind of like putting an arrow on a vehicle for us. But there is strong evidence that the reason why a Z was painted on these vehicles is because in Russian, Zapad means the West. Now, in Cyrillic, it's like the backwards 3. It's not a Z, but if you Romanize it, it's Z. So they painted a Z on all of their vehicles if they were part of the Western forces. And they painted a V on all of the vehicles coming from Vostok, the East. So Z stands for West, V stands for East. I'm going to go ahead and guess that O stands for divisions brought somewhere from central Russia. So, mystery solved. I like that explanation. All right, that's all for the questions in this video. I will be back tomorrow with a regular update, and I want to let you guys know that I finally filmed the podcast episode with Macer Gifford. He's a British national that has been fighting with the Ukrainian military for the last year. This podcast is going to go up on Sunday. Definitely don't miss it. That's all for this video. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.